All right, sir. With us today is Brian Rohde, a longtime employee of General Dynamics in the missile division, and he's going to be talking with us today about his time at General Dynamics right at the end of the company's tenure here in San Diego. General Atomic was the General Dynamics source company, and it came from the Little Red Schoolhouse, the Bernard Elementary on Point Loma. After they had brought the astronauts here in 1957, and they had held the Peaceful Uses of the Atom conference at Bernard Elementary, General Atomic and what would become General Dynamics moved out to Kearny Mesa. The last year that they were at the schoolhouse was 1958, and in 1959, linked up with NASA getting their start, General Dynamics moved out to Kearny Mesa, and Brian here has a long history at that facility, so he's going to tell us what the last days there were like. Astro was built in 1959, and famously all the original corps of astronauts visited, and that's where Gus Grissom did his famous "Do Good Work." I won't call it a speech because that's all it was. They asked him to speak and he just said, "Do good work." They called that facility Astro in the early days, and we're going to let Mr. Rohde take it from there with the Atlas program and the cruise missiles that came after. So when were you, well first Mr. Rohde, could you spell your name for us on the tape?
It's R-O-H-D-E.
Okay. When were you hired at GD?
My hire date was in November of 1978.
1978. In 1978 they were still working on the Centaur?
Very much so. The Atlas was still very much a very lively program at that time. My interview, interesting enough, was during the at the final assembly area for the Atlas and the Centaur program area, because the division of Convair had just successfully won the cruise missile program, and so there was a huge requirement to acquire skilled level personnel with various degrees of backgrounds, mechanical, industrial, the physical sciences, that quite honestly that had left General Dynamics and had left San Diego for a myriad of reasons. So I was out on vacation with my family, and my brother-in-law, who worked at Convair at that time, said, "Brian, would you like to go in and take a look and see how missiles," and he referred to them as ELVs, expendable launch vehicles.
Interesting.
And were made, and then I went in to the Convair facility, and I hadn't filled out a job application yet either. I was on a tour, and I didn't have my white shirt and tie on or anything else, and I filled out a job application at the Black Angus, which was right over here in the Kearny Mesa facility, and then I turned it in, and I got a job offer before I left the facility. And I did have an opportunity in the afternoon to go down to Plant 19, as well as to go to the Convair facility off of Pacific Coast Highway as well. And so when I was hired, my original assignment was going to be at the facility in Kearny Mesa, and I was going to be working in the final assembly area for the Atlas missile in the Centaur program. Nice. at that time. And then lo and behold, someone actually read my resume, and they had found out that I had a vast machining knowledge of manufacturing and processing, and because that's what my background was in, because I came from the steel mills. And they said, well, we're going to need you to kind of split your time up, if that's all right with you, between the facility in Kearny Mesa and the facility down at Lindbergh Field. So that's what happened, and my family didn't come out until February of 1979. But I really got the opportunity while they weren't here, as my family, is on the weekends to rummage around in the laboratories there at Convair, and especially in Kearney Mesa. And that's when I discovered this term, WD-40, and I also discovered that there was a vast photography lab and records facility in a basement. And so during the week I would go down and I would pull records off the storage cradle that they had, and I would ask if I could watch this and so forth.
Nice.
And the photographer, the head movie projectionist, the archivist, if you would, you're one of the few people who would come down here and look at this stuff. Please come down anytime. So I would set up some of that during the Saturdays or Sundays, because we didn't have VCRs and tapes and things like that. And so I would come back over to Convair and go look at some of that stuff. It was very interesting. I learned a tremendous amount of the history of
How
Convair.
far back did that archive go?
That archive, I got records back into 54, 55, and 56. I remember that distinctly because the facility at Lindbergh Field was the only one that existed prior to the Kearney Mesa facility being built. And there were test stands for the Atlas missile, literally in the middle of the manufacturing field at Convair, where they would take an Atlas missile and they would extend it and they bring in the carrier. They wouldn't ignite it, obviously, or set it off, but the idea was this is where they were doing the testing for the pivoting and turning and making sure that the carriers that we became very familiar with worked and functioned. There was a functionality of it because material handling was important. The skins of the Atlas missile and the Centaur were so thin and they were pressurized during the movement, so they had to be precision built. The carriers had to be well maintained. The drivers had to know exactly what they were doing, and so
I read of an event where a driver accidentally pushed up against one of the Atlases that were stored at the plant, and just the action of his forklift leaning against it, it actually popped, and it popped the two beside it. So we lost 3 of our Atlas under construction to the same incident that you're talking about. They were that fragile and that easy to damage. It must have been a nightmare to keep these things from being damaged.
there was a complete training program for the men, and at that time women, who would be the drivers. There was a complete training program for the material handling of those heavy ELVs. I'm not sure if a lot of people recall this, but at Plant 19, that was the weld shop for the tank farm. We used to refer to the Plant 19 as the tank farm. And the tank farm is where they actually did all the bending of the tubes. There was a fantastic tube shop there at the end of Plant 19, as well as the sheet metal fabricating and stretch form equipment that was used to make the very thin skins for the Atlas missile. It was a precision shop. You were the cream of the crop if you got to be the in a stretch form area working on the Atlas missile or any of the other precision sheet metal products that were required. Fins, skins, sheet metal for aircraft. You had to really know what you were doing.
Now, Consolidated, Convair, General Atomic, General Dynamics, one of the things that all of these companies had in common was their level of quality was constantly improving, and it was the one source of pride among this group of companies. The early rockets suffered a tremendous failure level, And even getting into the Atlas, the first run, there were issues because people were learning as they were going. This was a completely new class of vehicle using entirely new systems. But by the time you got to the Centaur, you went 7 for 7. There was no failures of any kind on the Centaur. That's an incredible record that I don't, in looking just basically through other programs, I don't see any rocket program that made it through its entire run without a failure. The Centaur must have been a real source of pride for your company and the people that worked on it.
It was. It was. And at the time when that was going on, there are other programs that demanded the skill level assets. The manufacturing operations of the equipment and the sheet metal and the personnel that were selected were the cream of the crop to work on that program. There's that perspective that it took 13 months just to get the material to put together to build the Atlas or the Centaur and to make it right. So if you consider it took just 13 months, let alone the skill set of the people required to assemble that, as well as the cleanliness requirements that were required, as well as the protection and material handling, there was a tremendous amount of technology associated with those programs.
This must have been a real strange period for the company. You'd gone from a high of over 40,000 employees in the early 60s when the Apollo program came and unfortunately went past your company. You weren't able to pick up any of those contracts. So it was a very lean time and you got down to less than 15,000 employees. You lost a lot of that corporate knowledge.
Right.
And in the wake of the Apollo program, instead of giving up or trying to switch over to other avenues, you stuck with it. You stayed with rocket technology, but you went in a new direction, cruise missiles, something that other companies really hadn't gotten on board with yet. Even the militaries hadn't gotten on board with it. They were so used to having a bomber where a man flies over a target, pushes a button, and takes out the target. The whole concept of sending a missile halfway around the planet to do the mission without a human was very, not only foreign, but it was very difficult for a lot of people in the military and a lot of civilians to wrap their brains around. But your company just jumped on the concept and put out what's really considered the standard for cruise missiles. The Tomahawk cruise missile is an unqualified success. It's been used for decades, and not only do our forces respect it and rely on it, but our enemies know its capabilities and they make decisions based on the fact that we have those. Between the cruise missiles of the 70s and the cruise missiles that we have today, you were involved with various programs. Can you talk a little bit about how those impacted you?
We had a tremendous opportunity when I was at Convair. We were given opportunities that I am absolutely sure were not given to other comparable engineers, technicians at Boeing or McDonnell Douglas, because we had the opportunity to excel, research, concentrate on things that we really liked doing, in addition to our normal job. Mine was in the industrial engineering aspects of manufacturing, where we did the tooling, we developed manpower, we did process flows, we did the analysis of time and motion, anticipated costs, and so forth. But one of my favorite things to do was, after we did our normal job, and because I had originally started out to be a double E, there were all types of opportunities to expand in areas where there was needed help. Backwire boards, electronics, connectors, all of that had been an integral part of the previous programs, including the Atlas program, the Centaur program, and the programs associated with the MD-11, KC-10, and so forth. I remember one time there was a scurry there to find personnel who would be willing to go work with McDonnell Douglas and on the KC-10 MD-11 associated with, because you had cables that ran all the way down the entire fuselage. And before the fuselage left, all the doors had to be actuated. And that required a very long cable, and there was a test set. Well, at that time when I got there, we had been building DC-10s for a number of years, and of course that skill set of people who were doing that were retiring, were going and leaving. You know, those people had moving out. They had worked on the 990 program, they had worked on the F-102s, the F-106s, and by that time, you know, they're looking at being, you know, 60 plus years old, so it's time for them to retire. So they went scurrying around trying to find people who would become certified in the back wire boards, manufacturing cables, harnesses, test procedures of the actuating systems on the doors. Well, I thought that was a fun thing to go do. So I said, sure, I'll take that on. And
where was that?
that was actually in Building 2 and in Building 3 at Lindbergh Field. This is just before a paint shop facility. We had a huge paint shop down at Plant 9, or at Convair, and just outside of there was part of the final assembly area for the sections of the MD-11 KC-10 program. And they all had doors and they all had to be actuated on, and those had cables that were used to actuate the pneumatics and so forth. Well, there was a requirement that those cables met a certain type of radio frequency requirements, so that you wouldn't create an EMF around the zones and all types of problems it creates. So if you're at 30,000 feet, someone presses a button, the door didn't actuate because of the RF that was going down the cables. So I was associated with that, and then that led on to me working into some other electrical applications on other cruise missile programs and the ACM program, and we created through the process, a gentleman who I have a great deal of respect for, his name is Ken Lake, created something called integrated subcontract management. And so we developed relationships with our suppliers, and we worked with the suppliers to get better product that came in that were actually installed on the missile programs, whether that be the AGM 109 or the 129 programs. Didn't make any difference because this equipment was important. We had training of technicians too, because this was new technology for a lot of folks. You know, the pneumatics, the actuating systems, the manufacturing, the bonding, whether it was composite bond or metal bond. This was new technology, and we were breaking things at one time more than we were actually making them. And that's when our quality department and upper management got a little bit nervous when we were breaking things, and our scrap pile got bigger than the parts
going out the front door.
Going out the front door for what we were building. But so there was always that issue, and deservedly so. And I say nothing but great about Convair because it gave me a tremendous amount of opportunity to do things that I would have never had to do in any other program. And
I've heard that almost the exact same sentence several other times from the people who worked there, that it was almost a unique Disneyland kind of a place where you had the opportunity to work with things that honestly there was no other place on earth that had that combination of things going on.
Right.
There's also a lot of activities after work there. They had everything from hiking clubs to bowling. What kind of those extracurriculars were you a part of?
Well, we had, of course, the Convair's club up in the Kearney Mesa area for the park. We refer to as a Cruise Missile Park. That's really what it was. And that's when my kids would go there. Of course, the trains and so forth, everybody remembers the
Yep.
train area. But we had an amateur radio
That
club.
was a little homemade train that they actually put together there for the employees' kids.
Yes, that's correct.
Really neat.
That was that was correct. It was put together by the tooling department and operations for the children of the employees, and then later on, of course, they built the nice commissary that was there, and we had a big swing set, and now it's the YMCA. By the way, that location is the YMCA. But I still, with the electronics aspect of it, or my job with electronics and what I was doing with my hobby. I'm an amateur radio operator. I was one of these folks, I still use Morse code, believe it or not. I still do that. And they had the commercial electronics division of General Dynamics, and then at the Convair Recreational Club, they had, of course, we would have lunches, and we would have the yearly parties, which I liked a lot, and I took my kids there. We ran around the train, and I got to run the engine, and I would talk with the folks that actually worked there and some of the retirees. And it was a unique organization that I don't think a lot of other companies had. I can't remember that, where I came from the Midwest, and so I think when Convair went away and the Convair Club went away, Recreational Club went away, it was hard. It was very, very hard for that. And my kids, who are now 40 and 37, still remember the train over at Convair.
Oh yeah.
They still.
Missile Park was
a big deal.
I came to San Diego in the late 70s, and really didn't know my way around town until the 80s. But by then, the culture was changing.
Mm-hmm.
The company was stretching out into different parts of the company and moving away from San Diego. You were here during the Great Shutdown.
I was.
The big event. The Kearny Mesa facility, the facility known as
Astronautics.
back then.
Yeah, it was Astronautics.
The shutdown had to have been fairly traumatic.
It was.
From what I've heard from other people, it was essentially like watching your own high school shut down, and then that spreads out to your whole town shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at it not as their company going out of business or moving this region. They looked at it as all of the various parts of their life that GD had been a part of all went away.
It did.
And there was a real, almost like I don't want to call it a depression, but there was a moment where people realized that this wonderful organization, this thing that had existed for only 25 years out there on Kearny Mesa?
Right.
In 25 years, you were the arsenal of democracy. You were visited by presidents and astronauts and movers and shakers from every level of our government,
right.
From the military. Mm-hmm. The term arsenal of democracy is overused, but that really describes General Dynamics and specifically that Kearny Mesa facility. What was it like for you personally, and what was your takeaway from that experience, watching this living, breathing organism and watching them disperse it? What was that like?
It was difficult. I had friends, acquaintances that I had been with since coming to San Diego. My family had to sit back and make a decision. Are we going to make San Diego our home and stay here, or are we going to move to where I had been offered a job? And there were 4 major programs at Convair that, when things started breaking up, the terminology merge, sell, buy was used a lot. And those words still are pretty sour in my mouth for a lot of reasons. But I'm very, I was very fortunate in working at Convair because it gave me opportunity to expand my skill set. And as it did, it made my technical skills bigger so that I could accept other types of jobs. And for that, I will always be thankful for Convair giving me that opportunity. Other than just doing my normal mechanical industrial engineering responsibilities, but being able to expand my skill set. When I watched other people who hadn't taken that opportunity to expand their skill set, I felt sorry for them. They would have to move back to the Midwest, or they'd have to go find other skills. I know some people that went into insurance, some people went into teaching, some people went to work at a little company called Qualcomm. And
they probably did all right.
They probably did all right. And then they were some folks that went to work at Solar Turbines. And then there were some other sheet metal facilities here in San Diego, not too far from here, that they went to. I know some folks were offered a job, as I was, up in McDonnell Douglas, working in their tooling department, because when I left, finally, the tooling for the MD-11 had been all completed and buttoned up, put on a truck, and we tried to have instructions that would go up to the Long Beach facility. Well, when it got up to the Long Beach facility, some way, shape, or form, the tools all got separated. And they didn't keep them in the kitting process that we had. And so Convair, through its many years of manufacturing both commercial and military aircraft, had developed a very thorough tooling process and tool control system that was in place with many abbreviations and many different types of acronyms, I'm guessing pretty much unique to Convair. So I got a telephone call from one of the folks up at McDonnell Douglas asking me if I would come up there and help them sort out all the tooling and so forth. And I had given him a few names of people that had left the tooling department, but they had gone to other jobs and went to other things and so forth. And they had the same problems up there that we had down here in being able to have tool control. Tool control is very, very important. Remember, this is sheet metal products. These are precision sheet metal tools and gauges and dies and stretch forms, and those all had to be coordinated. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what you were making, and that was a problem. So I was working at another company in Chula Vista, and then on the weekends I was going up to McDonnell Douglas and helping them do tool control, and then testing some of the equipment and making sure that it worked, because McDonnell Douglas had subcontracted the MD-11 fuselage to Convair, but that required certifications and qualifications of the equipment to make sure your equipment would produce a precision piece of sheet metal or fabricated part or whatever the case may be. And so that was very important. So when McDonnell Douglas came in and they took it all and they put it on a truck, and then they just, without doing the right tool coordination, and expect it to work and find out that it didn't, that was a problem. So I spent a year going back and forth on the weekends, which I got paid quite well for that. I had no problem with that, and then I had another job during the week down in Chula Vista working at a conveyor system company.
Nice.
So I was very, very lucky with that.
Did the company have any farewell?
We did. We did. There was a party that they had. We had a football game that we went to, and they offered meals, and we got the opportunities to have some nice luncheons. in my heart, I really feel that the upper management of Convair, they felt bad about it too, but yet they had families to feed. They had responsibilities to their family, both to the new corporate structure they were going into and to what the responsibilities that they had here at Convair to make it sure we had a as reasonable as possible settling of the facility here. Yeah, it still hurt, absolutely. I make no bones about it. It hurt. But
Do you still keep in touch with other General Dynamics?
From time to time, I'll see them over at Costco, or there used to be a Convair retirees club. I went to that a couple of times, but.
Did you happen to know an engineer named Hans Busch?
That name's familiar.
Elegant older gentleman, German guy.
Sure, German guy, yeah.
He was a friend of our museums, and I actually was his next door neighbor for about 30
really?
years.
Yeah.
He was extremely proud to come to America and be a builder of the Tomahawk cruise missile. He felt that of everything he did in his life, anything he did that was more important than helping defend America by building the Tomahawk.
The cruise missile was a great program. I came to Convair at the point when it was just beginning to build up out of the full-scale development FSD activity and
into the production phase.
Into the production phase, and that led to all types of opportunities for manufacturing and creative thinking, and for tooling, and for figuring out the best way to do a product, and to make sure our program was cost effective.
And it's still the standard by which cruise missile performance is judged today, and it's been superseded. There's definitely better things, newer things out there, but that quality product that you guys put out, the Tomahawk, really is a high watermark for you guys.
Yeah, it is, and it's interesting. The very first thing I saw when I walked in the facility, I saw the cruise missile that was sitting over there, and I remember the tail cone, the cruise missile tail cone. That was all the.
Because that was secret at the time.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
So they had various fairings that they put around that tail to make you guess what was under it.
Right, right, and the actuating system and the fin deployments and the mechanical parts that are inside the fins that deploy. We at Convair purchased 4 machines to manufacture the bearings, the parts, the shafts, the components inside of there, and we created at that time a machine center where I remember these parts. We had the TBR bar chuckers, and we had the Warner Swayze NC machines, and then we had the CNC Cincinnati's just on the other side of that, all concentrated on making cruise missile tail cone parts. And that was done at Lindbergh Field. Got to be really good at it. And those finishes are like a 250 finish or a 500 finish, depending upon what the application was and what the engineering says it was.
Whether it's air-dropped or if it's a sub-launch?
Well, actually the mirror finish more than anything else is because we actually had air gauges so that all the finishes, I'm talking about the internal working parts, and it wouldn't necessarily be mission particular, it was more along the lines of what part of the actuating system was going to be functioning first, or where it was located in the pneumatics of the system. And of course, the tube mock-up out of our tube shop was probably the most critical part of that, because I'll never forget, we had this small little U-shaped tube that went from the small little tank to the actuating system, and the amount of pressure that had to go through that was excessive, about 500 psi or more, going through a tube
into an elbow,
and then that would be the actuating system, and then it would be started by a pyrotechnic that would be going off. That would go into a chamber, and then that small chamber would have to be set up so that we have a little relief valve. I mean, and all that technology, all that had to be thought out. all had to be designed, all had to be worked, and that all had to function within a second and a half to make it work, and to make it work right, so that the thing didn't wobble and go, to the left. So we had a conveyor at our Lindbergh Field facility and at our Kearney Mesa facility, some very highly skilled personnel that knew how to make this stuff work. So yeah, I think about that. I think about that often. And now I go by that facility now and I see it's big, huge condominium complexes.
And they put a hospital on the other end of the property. There's lots of changes there.
It's a lot of changes in there. And remember, in San Diego, we had at one time 4 divisions. You had the Conveyor division, you had the Space Systems division, you had the Electronics division, and then Astronautics was folded into Conveyor. So, but you did ask earlier on about the records that were in the facility.
Yes.
In Kearney Mesa.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we knew everything was shutting down, there was a period of time for over a Christmas holiday where they said for those people that are interested who want to get paid a little extra, you could come in over the holiday and we were going to go through all the archives. And that was the archives that were at the Kearney Mesa facility, Plant 19 facility, the facility at Lindbergh Field, and that small little facility in Hillcrest. Mm-hmm. So we had to go collect all those. And so we got together and we were given instruction on what we were to look for and what we were to take out. Well, one thing led to another, and me being a bit of a historian, I broke the rules and I said, we're taking all the boxes. We're going to sort through and get rid of stuff, and if it's damaged or whatever, no, we're taking them all. That's what it was. And I got a little bit of hot water for doing that, to be honest with you, because I didn't want to just make a 30-second decision of something in a box that we can just throw away, because they had brought in dumpsters. They had dumpsters in Kearney Mesa, at Hillcrest, and down at Plant 19, and we were instructed to just throw everything away. Well, I wasn't going to do that, and I didn't. So I got myself in a little bit of hot water about that, and so the following January, when we all came in, they saw all these records. We had a room that was this size, filled full of records. Filled full of stuff that was there. Movies, technical documents, some drawings. Don't forget, Plant 19 was our tooling facility.
Yeah, so you had all the blueprints.
So we had all the blueprints, all the tooling, all the tool designs, time cards, and in Plant 19 was the tubing and brazing facility for the Atlas program, by the way. And so that little tube, that little U-tube that I talked about, that was manufactured there initially down at Plant 19, and then we brought our own tubing facility up at the Kearney Mesa facility, and then that was relocated down in Lindbergh Field, so for manufacturing purposes and so forth. By the way, cruise missile tail cone, start to finish, I remember this number clearly, we got down to 22 and a half hours worth of assembly time for the last 100 of those cruise missile tail cones.
For comparison, what would one of the earlier ones have taken?
It was 220, 230, 240. Wow. So that'll tell you the learning curve that it came down. Now, it took a long time to get there, but the last one was 22 and a half hours. There may be some that might be under 22 and a half hours, but generally speaking, the average for the last 20 or so was 22 and a half hours. I was not associated with that, but I remember seeing our crew load charts and what the labor was associated with that, so I know what it got down to. We could do a pretty good job on that cruise missile tail cone.
One quick question I wanted to go back to. On the first night of the Gulf War, the cruise missile had basically not been a proven technology until then.
Right.
There had been examples of it.
Right.
This was the first moment the world realized exactly what Tomahawks could do when they're seen flying down streets and making turns to go to their target. What was it like as one of the builders of this system to see that the opening bell of the Gulf War and seeing that the first aircraft over Baghdad weren't aircraft, they were your products?
Immense pride. I can just say it was immense pride, knowing what they were doing. I kind of had a feeling of what it must have been like when you built a B-24 or built a PBY, and knowing that it was going to go into a battlefield engagement. But there was immense pride, and we were in a conference room, and there was a management meeting that happened that night, and all of our managers and directors and VPs were there, and we were all told that we wanted to go to this. It's going to be really, really important. And I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about this, by the way. We went to the management meeting, and it was at one of the facilities down in Mission Valley, and there had been a projection system, movie system set up, and we were watching this. I mean, it was almost live. You know, this was prior to CNN, by the way, and it was just absolutely amazing to see that and having that amount of pride, because we all knew that we're in that room what this thing was all about, and we had introduced something into a world that wasn't ready for it in many respects. Obviously, the bad guys weren't ready for it, you know, but we were very much excited about it and seeing it, and I'm sure we were excited, and then we also knew the ramifications of what the end product was going to be, because you never wanted to be on the receiving end of one of those. And we felt bad about that. One of the things we kind of walked away, that we, yes, it was a deterrent, but we never really want to see it used, but it was hard because we knew what the end results of these things were going to be. I was excited to see it being used, but being a person of faith and knowing that it was going to be used to do someone else in was hard. So, yeah. But we knew what the reason was.
That's the dual nature.
That's the dual nature, right?
Mr. Rohde, I am getting to the end here, and I have a question that I ask everybody that I interview, the same thing. Being in aviation, being involved with rockets, my final question is, what's the weirdest thing you ever saw in this? What sticks with you? Something that you didn't think you'd ever see, and you know you'll never see it again.
We were in Kearney Mesa, and there was a requirement for a flush and fuel facility to be installed for the cruise missile, and to get all the debris out of the missile and make sure it was clean so that the engine would be pure, and so forth. We had the set up the flush and fuel facility. I didn't partake in it, but I knew it was set up there. And then I had heard about it because I was doing something at Plant 19, and they said, you know, this is going to take place. And so it was a beautiful summer night. Stars were up, and the cruise missile was on this platform that they had put up, big stanchions, big pipes, and they were going to do a complete run of a cruise missile.
Wow.
And they had it set up, and they fired it off, and you could see the glow of the flame coming out the back end of the missile, and you could see the deployment of the wings and the fins. You could actually, you know, hear it, the noise of what it was. And there was no barrier, there was no stand away or whatever. This was between the buildings, and it was at night, and you could see what was going on, and then you could see the beautiful stars, and you go, wow, this is really cool.
That's quite a moment.
That was really quite a moment. I mean, I've seen Atlas missiles go up to space before, but this particular one was just, you know, unique to me. And I was thinking back about my own personal history. I'm going, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And that's what I remember.
Well, Mr. Rohde, I want to thank you for supporting our project with the Living History project at the San Diego Air and Space Museum. And we may call you to do secondary interviews, and I just wanted to thank you for your time today. So Thanks again for coming out. And
Thank
ladies
you.
and gentlemen, that's Brian Rohde.